Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talk, a show where we talk about the stories of people living in Taiwan and Taiwanese living abroad. I'm Trevor Tortomasi, and joining me in the studio today is Sam Yarbs of 2-3 Comedy. Sam has written for the Night show here in Taiwan,夜夜秀. He has also hosted countless stand-up shows all around Taipei and Taiwan, and he has participated in international comedy competitions. Sam, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here, man.
Absolutely, man.
ICRT, we made it.
We made it.
2-3 Comedies on ICRT, man. Nice.
Starting off, I'm curious, how did 2-3 Comedy Club get started in Taipei?
So I was living in Kaohsiung. I started doing comedy when I lived down in Kaohsiung with a good friend of mine, Rob Stocky. Shout out Rob Stocky. He's in New York. Still doing comedy in New York, killing it. And we were doing comedy down there. And he was ready to move back to the U.S. He was ready to make a run at it. And I knew I wanted to stay in Taiwan. And I moved up to Taipei because at the time, there wasn't much going on in the stand-up scene in Kaohsiung. We had a weekly mic that was very poorly attended. And I knew Taipei was the place for English language comedy to come up. And so when I moved up here with a friend of mine, Meg Anderson, we started 2-3 Comedy together. At that point, 2-3 Comedy is separate from the club. It was just a Facebook page, a group that we organized shows kind of under this umbrella.
And what year was that?
That was in, let's see, the club's been open 2 years and probably 2 years before that. So 2017, 2018.
Okay.
Yeah, around then, yeah. And so at that point, we were doing our shows in the basement of 23 Public, which is a bar near the Taipei MRT station. And the kind of goal that I had, because there already was comedy going on in Taipei at the time. There was a group that were doing shows, but they had this kind of like loose organization where people would do shows like at different bars and there'd be different hosts. And it was kind of hard to know like where shows were, because they would pop up everywhere and then maybe disappear for a month, depending on who was running the show. And I wanted there to be like one home for comedy. If you come here every Monday, you're going to see an open mic. And 23 Public very generously allowed us to use their space. And so because, again, we're trying to forge that connection, come here for comedy, 23 Public, we chose the name 2-3 Comedy. So it was directly taken from our partnership early on with 23 Brew Company. So, yeah.
Yeah, I remember going to comedy clubs, I guess in like 2013 or 2014, and feeling like it was a fresh new scene here in Taipei as compared to somewhere where there's comedy everywhere, like LA or New York. But just in a short 6 to 8 years, 2-3 Comedy has really become like, it seems like a go-to place. What do you think makes it different than other comedy clubs?
Well, I think, again, if we're talking about the club itself, that was 2 years later. So originally it was just the consistency of the open mics. And I shouldn't say that's totally unique to what we did at 2-3. The history of comedy in Taiwan and Taipei is really interesting. It goes back a long ways. There have been other peaks, and there was the Taipei Comedy Club owned by Socio Chang, who now owns Comedy Base, that did bilingual shows well before. So they had this space, but then there was also these kind of fallow periods where there was nothing for a while. The only show in Taipei for English was like a once a month show at a Greek restaurant, and it was and sometimes the mics didn't work there. So there was these ups and downs where these peaks and valleys. So
yeah, the peak implies a downfall. Like what sort of thing makes something go out of style or out of?
I think when you're looking at something, especially that as good as it's been before on the English side, it's always been a hobbyist thing at the end of the day. It's been something that people do in addition to their real pursuit. I don't think anyone, and I don't want to speak for people who came before me, but I don't think anyone tried to professionalize it or take it as like, this is what I want to do. I want to make a run at English comedy in Taipei. When you lose the driving force of maybe 1 or 2 people through, whether they move on or go back home or, just the changing of venues. The Taipei Comedy Club shut down. At that current place, I think their rent was going to get jacked way up, and they chose to shut down. And then when he later reopened, they focus now comedy exclusively on Mandarin comedy. It was just kind of a fragile infrastructure.
So on your Facebook page, 2-3 Comedy's Facebook page, the most commonly asked questions are, what's the schedule? What's the menu? Normal questions. And then how can I see Brian? Brian Sungbo. He's pretty famous. I'm curious. I have to ask about him. Like, how did you guys get to know each other, and what's his
I actually
role?
Brought him here. He's he's
in your pocket.
Yeah, sorry guys. Yeah. So I knew Brian going back to before starting 2-3 Comedy. When I was living in Kaohsiung, coming up and doing shows again at that Greek restaurant. Brian at that point had just come back from France, where I think he'd done his master's degree over in France. And I was introduced. He was like this young kid. He wants to try English stand-up, and he was doing spots at the same shows as us. The same thing, like 8-minute spots here and there. And you could tell right away he was very funny. But he was really raw. He had just gotten started. And at that point, he wasn't doing anything in Chinese. He was just doing English stand-up. So I built a friendship with him over the years. We just would do shows together for a long time. And then when we started 2-3, at that point, he was by then probably, one of the best English comics, again, doing it in English. And so I would try to get him in every show. And at a certain point, he filmed a set of his, I think it was at Comedy Base, where he performed, and that clip was picked up by several of the amalgamators and the and
meme
that
sites.
And that clip ended up getting like 3 million views in like a couple days or something like that. And we were all like talking about, we're like, whoa, Brian's gonna be famous with it. But we still had no idea what he was going to become. And then, I mean, he was just from the beginning. He was so smart about the way he pursued. After that first clip, he made other clips kind of addressing feedback to it. He just did he keyed in. He got the opportunity and the luck, but he created his own luck by really following up and being prepared for it. And from then, it was just this snowball of momentum. And he was hosting Chinese language open mics at that point. So we'd expanded from just English to Chinese mics as well, still in that 23 public space. And then, a few shortly later, he was starting the Night Show, and STR Network is his kind of network and things like that. And he built this kind of roster of Chinese of comedians, and it's great. Yes, it's awesome to see what he's done. So, and by the way, you can see him on Thursday nights. He's there every Thursday. Like, buy those tickets in advance.
Just to answer the question that you get on the Facebook page. Right now, I think the advantage of working with Brian is probably that he has a deep connection to the larger language base here in Taiwan. And so having a place like 2-3 Comedy where you can have English language comedy, which is succeeding in its own audience, and Chinese language comedy. How has it felt, I guess, the simplest question, to have a bilingual comedy club?
Well, it feels completely natural because, I mean, it reflects kind of the evolution of where we started. We started with an English language open mic. We added the Chinese language open mic. And that was really when you saw Chinese language comedy really kind of take off. And a lot of it is attributed directly to Brian and his success. But when you look at the wider landscape now, it's not just Brian. There's a lot of other, I think in the STR network, which is Brian's network, this year they're filming specials for Hello and for Chilsef, who are two, if you've ever watched the Night Show, they're two of the recognizable cast members there, and they host, and they're extremely funny stand-ups. So these guys are going to have their own specials. They're selling out huge venues, 1,000+ seat venues for their specials. And even outside of STR, there's lots of other names who are coming up and building their own followings, whether it's through YouTube. So for 2-3, where we kind of fit in, it's true that we're a bilingual club, but if you go to 2-3, you might not necessarily have a bilingual experience.
That's fair, yeah.
English nights are in English. We've done, I think, in our history, maybe 4 shows where Brian and I host together that are truly bilingual shows. And it's
got a really unique audience. It's a hard target to hit. So.
And I don't think we've ever really charged tickets for them either. They're not it's a very, normally you have to have lots of comics doing short sets in their language, because if you came for Chinese and you're hearing someone do 10 minutes in English, you're just tuning out. It's not enjoyable. And then, as a comic, if you're watching somebody kill or they're crushing in Chinese, you're like, oh, they're not gonna like my English at all. It's a bummer. So you got to keep it quick and make it like game based. So most nights, an English night's gonna be an English show. Brian's night, you're not gonna see anyone doing anything in English there. So the ownership, the structure, the idea behind it is bilingual, and but the execution on a given night is going to be Chinese or English, depending. I should say Fig, the improv group, they do bilingual stuff. They are truly bilingual. Nice. Yeah, they're good up there and jibber jabber.
So there's a clear division for audiences to know what they're looking for there. But in having 2 different languages going on over the course of a week, you have some English language nights where your local comics are performing in not their native language, and vice versa. Have you performed in Chinese before?
Yes. Saying that I have performed comedy in Chinese is insulting to both Chinese and comedy, but I have gone on stage with a microphone and attempted to get through 5-minute sets. For a while, I convinced myself that I was getting better at it. And I remember I did one open mic that Brian actually hosted. And afterwards, he asked the audience to raise their hand if anybody understood a word I said. And only 2 people raised their hand. And they were both people I had talked to in English during my set. So I was like, oh, I kind of realized, at a certain point, obviously it's fun. I don't think anyone minds you trying, but it's become so popular that if I were to go to a Chinese mic now, I would be taking somebody's spot who really deserves a chance to be there. So I want to try again in the future, but
you can make it as short as you want, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I could pop up for 30 seconds, I guess, and that'd be one way to spend a Tuesday night, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. But it's interesting because every comic who is truly bilingual, like Brian's truly bilingual. He grew up, he spent significant time in the U.S. and Taiwan. He speaks both fluently, and he's told me multiple times, it's like, well, you cannot just translate a joke. If you have a joke in English, you cannot go word for word, this means this means this. You can take a premise and apply it to the other language. You can be like, this is funny. Funny is still funny, but you have to approach it just grammatically, conceptually from an entirely different angle. Yeah. And the idea that you're going to go up there with, I'm going to write my English set in pinyin down and be like, again, it's not, at that point, it's not comedy. And some of the laughs you're eliciting are because of how bad your Chinese is, which is a crutch that you can use for a little bit, but I don't think anybody.
It's not scalable, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. It's very limited. Yeah, again, like 5 minutes of that may be cute once a week.
I'd like to get your opinion too on like what jokes have you seen work in English but not in Chinese? Maybe even if you didn't understand it, have you heard about like what seems to translate well or doesn't translate?
Like in terms of like topics or subject matter kind of, or just like that. It's interesting. And that's an interesting question because this is one I get asked all the time in different interviews. It's kind of like, the crux of it is kind of what you're asking is like, do Taiwanese audiences understand the English humor or whatever like that? Or do they just like to hear people joke about things in Taiwan or whatever like that? And it's just, the range of different styles of comedy is so broad that it's really impossible to narrow down. And also, I think that it's a mistake to target and say that the Taiwanese audience is monolithic because, Brian averages a much younger audience. There's another comedian, Taiwanese comedian named Jim, who does very, very dark jokes. Think of like Anthony Jeselnik, whatever like that. His audience, you can see a lot more, tends to be a little more male heavy, maybe a little bit older. But one of the interesting things you mentioned about like the approach for the club, though, there is one thing that I think that Brian brought when he started doing the Chinese mic. And again, I don't want to speak for the history of Chinese language comedy in Taiwan, but there is a Chinese history of comedy that's outside of the Western framework of stand-up. Stand-up comedy is a Western art form. It emerged out of vaudeville. You can trace a line from, Bob Hope through Lenny Bruce, George Carlin, Richard Pryor, into Chris Rock, Chappelle, Louis C.K., blah, blah. You can draw a line. I'm sorry, I just named all male comics. I'm sorry. Jessica Kirsten, hilarious. But you could draw a straight line and kind of progress this. There's outside of that exists a history of Chinese language comedy. Crosstalk would be the most popular one that's known, where you have the 2 people on stage going back and forth. And some of Taiwanese early comedy definitely developed out of that. If you watch Taiwanese variety shows today, those are so clearly influenced by crosstalk. And so Chinese language open mics before were very kind of free-flowing in terms of what you'd expect at a stand-up comedy open mic. Yeah. You might have a guy go up for his first time and do a 15-minute story, and there's no punchlines along the way, but the ending might be a funny story, and that's like, in English, you're getting the light after 4 minutes. You're like, dude, jokes. And Brian kind of brought that expectation to his mics. He would tell comics, he's like, you need to tell jokes. There's a laughs per minute thing. These are kind of targets that we have when we're writing. So, for lack of a better word, he kind of introduced a bit of a Western style to the open mic itself. And the benefits of that is you get a lot more comics on stage, like when you have these 5-minute limits and you're going through, and combine that with his exploding popularity. Now you see these open mic lists are filled up hours before the show starts. People are really eager to come out and try. And I've seen in the recent thing I've seen is tons of little pop-up open mics in Chinese all over the city. All these bars being like, yeah, we're going to run a Chinese mic, whatever. And so, which is great.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
without advertising the competition, as it were, I have seen since I guess the past couple years, I've seen more Chinese comedy clubs pop up. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And again, that is good. That is great.
Awesome.
It is all good because we have a great room. You know, our room is 150 seater, built for stand-up comedy, great separation from performance room and bar. It's a great club. So the more other clubs that spring up, not that they're not also fantastic and have great venues, whatever like that, but we know that our room, you're going to work at those clubs. You want to get on the show that Brian's hosting, right? He's you know, so there's a benefit to being an A room in a city. And I would consider, Comedy Base also is a fantastic room, and Socio is a legend for what he's done for comedy in Taiwan. Yeah. But I would consider us one of the A rooms.
And comics, you need more than one club. You need quite a few clubs to go through and practice and get to different audiences.
Oh my God, I wish we had that in English. Oh my goodness, if you could just pop up every night, that'd be fantastic. You know, and it's not like that in English, but in Chinese, the more it can get like that. I'm friends with these comics on Instagram, and their stories, they're grinding. They're every night they're doing mics, and it's not New York City. You know, shout out Esther again, where you can do 6 spots in a night. Like, you know, that's comedy mecca. But I mean, if you're starting to get up 5 nights a week, we're going to see the next Brian come from one of these mics. And they're going to be really tested by fire in a way that even Brian wasn't. And he's a brilliant comic and a brilliant writer. But we're going to see out there some 19-year-old kid who dropped out of NTU.
dropped out of French university.
Dropped out of French university. Made the same mistakes the rest of us did. And he or she is going to be the next big star.
Okay, so Sam, how did you personally get started in comedy? How far back was this?
I lost a bet and got. No, I had a buddy who was friends. He surfed with another guy, Rob, who I shouted out earlier. At that point, the only open mic in Kaohsiung, once a month, they were doing it at this place called Brickyard. But they was like, so he's doing a once a month all genres open mic in a dance club on a Sunday, you know? So some guy gets up and plays Wonderwall, and then Rob gets up there and he's like, let me tell you some jokes. And people just like, what's going on? So he wanted to start this real comedy open mic, and I had talked to my roommate about doing comedy. So Rob just messaged me one day and he's like, I heard you like to tell jokes, come out and tell jokes. And of course I was like, no, I'll go and watch the first one. But he just like got on me. He was like, no, dude, like, I'll tell everyone it's your first time. The audience will support you. You got to do it. And I was unemployed at the time. So I was like, all right, let's do it. I talked myself into it, and my friends were like pumping me up, like, go do it. And I showed up and I was like, all right, what order am I in the lineup? He's like, all right, well, it's me, then you, and it's me again. We're the only comics. I was like, oh no. He's like, how much time do you have?
Sandwich.
I was like, I think I have like 10 minutes. He's like, you could see his eyes like, you have 2 minutes. And I was like, I think I got 10. I had 2. I had 2 minutes. And I got up and I got like 1 laugh my first time. It was at Black Dog in Kaohsiung. And I loved it. Right from then I was like, well, I'm going to do this. And I was so lucky that I was met this guy, Rob, who was obsessed. He had a surf van. But I had another friend of mine in Kaohsiung, Tommy, build us a stage, and we would throw the stage in his van, and we would drive around. We'd spend our weekends. We'd Facebook message bars in different cities, and we'd just go and pull up and do shows if they'd have us in there. We'd bring our own stage. We'd be like, we got it. We got the stage rolled out, and that's what we did for a year. Our goal was to do 100 shows in a year, and we hit that in the year. And so, that was like that was like when I was like, okay, I never want this to not be part of my life, basically.
Yeah. Well, like when I first met you, I thought you had been forged in the fires of like deep city New York or something, comedy clubs. But
no,
you started
never.
Here in Taiwan.
Here in Taiwan, yeah. And then the first time I kind of got a pop and knew that I could do a little bit better. I've been doing comedy about a year, and I got accepted to the Hong Kong International Comedy Fest, which was the biggest festival in Asia at the time. And it's 30 comics. You do 3 nights, and each night the top 3 advance to the finals. And I finished 3rd in my night, and I made it to the finals my first year doing it. And my goal going over there was like, I just didn't want to be obviously the worst. I was like, if I can just hang with these guys.
If I can look at someone else and say, he's worse than me.
Yeah, or even just like, maybe it's close. You know, like even if it's just like, oh, he wasn't like totally obvious. Like I didn't get booed, like no tomatoes thrown or whatever like that. And the finals is like a 500-person room, which was like, you know, I can't even tell you how many times bigger than the biggest show I'd done at that point. And I did all right. I mean, I didn't place top 3, but I made it to the finals, and I looked like I belonged there. And that's when I realized like, oh, okay, like, you know, for what's going on over here, like I know I feel a lot more confident about my place. And doing that festival exposed me to people who book shows around Asia, and that's what let me get started doing shows in the region, basically.
How does comedy feel in the international space as opposed to doing something like, have you ever done comedy in the States?
I have absolutely bombed at a few open mics in the US. Yeah, going back. I did the classic mistake of invite your friends to come see you do an open mic. I didn't realize how brutal, like, I know a little more now, but how like brutal it was. My first open mic in Boston, I showed up. I've been doing comedy again about a year. And I rolled in and there were 70 people in the bar. And I was like, this is a great turnout. And they were like, they're all comics. I was like, what? I'm like, they're all comics waiting to do that. The host would introduce comics 3 at a time. It'd be like, Angeline, Trevor, Sam up next. And you just have to know your time. You got 2-minute spots. And nobody like laughed or looked at you. They were all just looking at their notes, whatever. And it was just, that's what the open mic was on a Monday. It was it was literally just like a workout space. And I invited like friends. So immediately all the other comics just like, this idiot. Like, look at this guy. He invited his friends. He thinks this is a show. He thinks it's a show. And everyone would just get up and they'd be like, hey, yeah, like they have their notes. Yeah, this is something I'm working on. Like, and they just like do the, and I got up like, I'm like, hey guys, like, how's everyone doing tonight? And everyone's just, you could see, just like, no, dude, no, that's not what
been around the block so many times.
So I ate it a bunch of times. Yeah.
Or I mean, I've noticed that 2-3 comedy, it does feel a lot like a workshop on like maybe a Monday when people are going in just doing their sets. It's like mostly comics in the room, and which is a great vibe because you get to see everyone, like it's really honest comedy. You see things that don't work, but you also see a lot of things that are there for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's the spirit of the open mic. And I would say like in general, we have like a very supportive open mic. Comics listen to each other. That's rare in other places that I've seen. People give each other feedback. But yeah, an open mic is what it is. It is what it is. It's for comics to work on and weed out what's not working in their act. So you have to hear things, there's a reason we don't charge a ticket for open mic. I always say in the introduction, So, some of it's going to work, a lot of it's not. But certainly once you turn to a show, when it's a weekend, if someone is trusting you with a part of their Friday night, we hope that we give them a good show. There's an obligation you have to the audience. They're coming out on their weekend. They're having a drink. They're sitting down. And if you're advertising it as a show and you're saying this is a show, like our craft comedy monthly show, then that's one that I think every comic feels an obligation to deliver.
So another huge achievement that you can add to your list is that you started 2-3, was it in 2019?
Yeah, we opened it in 2019.
And so you've had a wild ride through the pandemic.
Yeah, we hit it right at the beginning. We were like, can't wait for our first international act. Oh, no, wait.
Oh, no.
That's never going to happen. Yeah, we had our first international act booked. Andy Curtin, a hilarious comic at the time, was in Hong Kong. He's in Australia now. He was going to come over and do a show in English and Chinese. And then, of course, COVID hit. And so that one had
what was it like during that time? Taiwan seemed like was one of the only places where you could do stand-up, continue doing live stand-up amid a lot of lockdowns happening all over the world.
Yeah, a lot of jokes. This is the best comedy show in the world right now, blah, blah, blah. A lot of that. Yeah, a lot of that. But it was, throughout, outside of just comedy, the COVID experience in Taiwan has been completely unique, right? The outside of, the last summer, basically, we've been able to, enjoy life with degrees of freedom that are kind of unparalleled anywhere. And so, certainly when you're reading about the news from the US, from back home, and, everything is shut down and locked down, and that way, remember like before the vaccines, there was no like light at the end of the tunnel type stuff. And it was just, and we're over here still doing our open mics and doing things. And also we were really lucky at the time. A lot of comics, we were blessed like Esther, a lot of Taiwanese comics who were based or living in the U.S. moved back. So not just Esther, we also had a lot of folks from Los Angeles. So our roster grew, and we had a kind of a bumper crop, a lot of good performers coming in, and it was great for us.
So what did you learn from doing open mic hosting and shows over the internet on Zoom during the pandemic? When we had the epidemic here last year during May 2021, you were hosting shows on a big old Zoom call.
Big Zoom call,
It's kind of like doing one-handed push-ups. Like you know how to do a normal comedy show, but you have to do it with crutches.
That's a good analogy. Yeah. Actually, it reminds me, I think I still have to cancel my Zoom subscription. I don't think we're going back online anytime soon. So
if nothing else got done today,
I'm going to check that box off. Yeah, geez, $12 a month still running, man. So, the Zoom, it reminded me how much I love live comedy, honestly. It was such a, and shout out to the comics who have been continuing to do it and who did it for years longer. It's very tough. The delayed, there's things you can learn from it. You can still write, you can still tell jokes. Like you said, it's better than no comedy, but it doesn't compare at all to actually being in front of an audience live. That's the reason you do comedy, for that. The one thing was very funny about that though was, we advertised it on our Facebook page. And the Chinese comedy elected not to do Zoom open mics. Okay. They were like, we don't want to mess with this. We're fine. We'll wait. It's all good.
Don't want to mess with that. What kind of a vibe is that?
They were just like, honestly, like when
maybe
I spoke
exhausted or just like,
yeah, they were just tired. They were like, no, we're staying in. We don't want to do this Zoom thing, whatever, like that. They just didn't want it. They had they watched one of ours. They're like, no, not for us. We'll wait. But because there was the only open mic offered, a lot of the fans would come in. And I remember like an hour into these shows, you start getting these messages like,
where's Brian?
Is this all in Chinese? Is this all in English? Will anyone do Chinese? I'm like, oh yeah, this is all English. And what would happen was people were so polite, they wouldn't leave the Zoom chat, but they would just mute their mic and turn off their camera. Mm-hmm. So you'd have like 70 people in the Zoom call, and there's 10 people with pictures and then like 5 pages of just blank. So you have no idea if they're listening, if they understand what you're saying, if anything's going, if they're still in the room. It was wild. It's just like, what is going on?
It's like when you have 1 million followers, but like 2 comments.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's all bots. What's going on? Yeah, it was wild. Yeah. So yeah, thank goodness that was a brief spell.
So I guess finishing up, 2-3 also hosts a lot of other shows. You guys are doing a lot of stuff, traditional theater performances. You have improv. You even have like drunk Shakespeare and drag shows. Do you see even more performance genres on the horizon? Or
probably one of the biggest we're kind of excited for is we upgraded our stereo and sound system internally recently, and just started experimenting with having some live music and bands in the space, because realized that room can also be a great like kind of listening room, because it's separate from the bar. And the bands we've had great feedback so far. So looking to incorporate a little of that, maybe like early comedy shows and then DJs staying till later with a more of a lounge kind of atmosphere. So definitely live music is one thing thinking we're looking to add. But the biggest thing on the horizon for us is when international travel opens back up. We have the biggest comedy club in Asia when that opens up again. And we are well positioned to take advantage of that. There's going to be lots of opportunities for live performance at venues larger than ours with big comedy stars coming in. I know a lot of promotional companies are already working on contracts for people coming in. I think that once you see the quarantine drop, you're going to be surprised by the quality of international comedy that's going to be coming to Taiwan. And 2-3, I think, is going to be at the center of that.
What, you said the largest comedy club in Asia?
I believe that's correct in terms of like a comedy club, because Hong Kong had a huge one, but it was shut down. The Live Nation was building one there, and that project fell apart. Singapore, Mary Line, I believe, is close. I don't think they have a dedicated comedy club anymore. Crack House in Malaysia I think we have more seats than them. And we've got more seats than I think any of the other comedy clubs, like full-on dedicated comedy clubs. There are larger shows, like people like in larger venues. And I'm sure in China, for Chinese language, there must be some bigger venues. But in terms of, as far as I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Someone else tries to compete, you just buy more chairs.
Exactly. Just stack them up. We'll rip down that wall. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay. Yeah. Nice, man.
Stack them up.
So last question is pretty general, but how do you feel about the future of stand-up in Taipei, in Taiwan?
I mean, tremendous. I mean, touching on it like briefly, the future, especially for the Chinese language, is the sky's the limit there. The popularity of it rising, and again, the opportunity for comics who are interested to get on stage multiple times a week is going to breed a generation of comics who have more stage time than any of the comics that we're seeing now who are kind of in their prime. So you would think it's only going to get better. Also, you're seeing a lot of these different companies who are investing money into stand-up and also stand-up adjacent things like news channels, and you're seeing all this energy, and as that energy comes and as the eyeballs come on it, you get money and advertising involved in it as well. So I think it's gonna absolutely boom. For English, when the borders open back up, we're really well positioned to be there. We'll always be a part of it, but especially for Chinese language comedy, the sky's the limit. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And anything else to finish off that you'd like to say to the people of Taiwan? Any plugs?
Come check out 2-3 Comedy. Don't be scared. Come on down. It's Linson Bay, but it's the nice part of Linson Bay. We're near TGI Fridays. It's nice. So come on, check us out. 7 nights a week.
All right, 2-3 Comedy. This is Sam Yarbs. Thanks for joining us today, everyone. This has been Taiwan Talk. Until next time, I'm Trevor Tortomasi on ICRT FM 100. If you'd like to hear more from ICRT, you can check out our other podcasts. We've got Taiwan This Week, a roundup of the news in Taiwan every Friday, English in the News for useful English expressions explained in Chinese, and EZ News, spelled with the letters E and Z, for simplified daily news. For some lighter news in both English and Chinese, check out News Bites and News for Kids. And if you enjoy them, tell a friend. Thanks for listening.